Makes you want to proclaim something. Well, good evening, all whom have gathered. I'd like to thank those in advance for entrusting an evening such as this in the hands of a weary me. And I say weary because in real life, we're porous. It means that we're absorbing things, the good and the bad, all the time. And amidst the linear, there's always something beckoning. And for me, I've been blessed by having the seed orientation, meaning parents, grandparents, the people around me. That was the nurturing I had from day one in my life. And so that no matter how challenging, no matter how tough, no matter how sad or troubled, I always know that somewhere out there is the glow, it's the shine, it's the love, it's the yes that beckons, it's the smile, it's the gift. And so I want to stand here now and say thank you for all of those who responded in such short notice. The young people that you heard from, these are their words, so we have to listen. I didn't have to do much editing. It was their sentiments. I asked 3 questions, and they sent it back. And I thought, how honest. None of them are old enough to vote, and yet they have a yearning for which we have a responsibility to. We have to listen. And for Center for Interfaith Relations, I don't know why you asked me to do this. It was in print before I knew it. And I want to say thank you because it did push me to engage and conjure and unleash that which was buried for a while. You know, when you have losses, when you have loads, sometimes you're in autopilot just to get things done, and then you have to move a little more. And what I thought of, I've been asking, who should be the keynote speaker? What was customary? Would you allow this Muslim to stand at your podium in your beautiful cathedral and narrate or curate? Would you entrust that? And I want to say thank you for saying yes. For Father Michael, for standing in your house. For all of Louisville, for the mayor, for the Browns, for pushing this forward. For the young ones that, can you stand up one more time? The young people. Thank you. You know, when we were trying to figure out what would be a natural weave and not just a put together, what would enable message, mission, song, music to come together and feel like, even if you've just met, that you're some kind of kin. And there were a couple of people that came to my mind as I was drafting things, and I kept dismissing it. I kept putting it away, saying it's probably not possible. And then it was. 3 weeks ago, I received a response from our keynote speaker. And I thought it was an answer. Because in the numbness, how many of you function numb sometimes in autopilot? Sometimes in there, if you pause, if you're still enough, the answer is always there. Sometimes we dismiss it, we second guess it, but it's always there. And so this is a person who some 20 plus years ago, when she hit the television screen, many of us felt a kinship, we felt a sistership from long distance. Not just because she was attractive or smart, not just because she was a woman of color, finally, hallelujah. But it was the authenticity in which she served, spoke, beckoned, translated, transmitted. You felt some kinship with a stranger that suddenly was no longer a stranger. There was a sisterhood. And so I'm one of those persons, I don't use the word fan, but an appreciator of your soul self, Your lone self, the times when you have felt isolated, there are many you should know, were rooting for your peace of mind, for you to know that there was a kinship in the world out here who appreciated and wanted to say thank you 1,000,000 times over because of your dignity, because of the way you travel the globe and give voice to people who we never would meet, who would never have a word or never touch our lives here. You did that. Sometimes in the challenge, there's always a gift. I'm one that knows that. As I live 52 years now without the very person whose name precedes me, imagine that. So how do we sustain the heartbeat? How do we sustain the life? How do we pump in that which gives us joy and meaning and significance when that which initiated may not be here anymore? We remember them. And to you, Lady Curry, I say thank you for answering short notice, for flying from across the globe and then packing to get over here to share the Festival of Faiths with us in this honorable ceremony. And I welcome you to the stage and to Louisville, Kentucky.
That was honestly one of the most beautiful introductions, and I've given a number of speeches that I've ever heard. Ambassador Shabazz, thank you so much for your incredibly kind words. And I want you to know that I have always wanted to do something for Ambassador Shabazz. It has been within me to want to do something for her because of her good works and also because of the legacy of her great family. And so to me, this talk is an offering, and I'm grateful for that. I also want to say that it has been a complete joy to find myself among all of you and listen to your song and to hear your poems and your writings and to feel this reservoir that you are of humanity, celebrating a festival of faiths, and in these times, focused on compassion. I wonder, would you consider the possibility that you are a part of an ever-rising force for good that is no less than humanity's greatest hope? Let me explain. When one works over the course of decades as a journalist, it is possible to witness terrible human suffering. You see places in this nation where the cruelties of hunger and poverty, and especially indifference, are so deep, so intractable, and generational that the American dream honestly does not have a chance. You may even witness the worst of what we humans can do to each other: war, racism, genocide, the systematic use of violence against women and children. In a lot of places in the world, including Syria and Kosovo and Darfur and Iraq, Lebanon, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Congo, the inhumanity you have witnessed can even haunt you a little. You ask, how can humans be so cruel to each other? At first, the answers you get tend to be exactly the same. There are bad people in the world who do bad things. They're the bad guys, them, not us. We could never do what they did. So then you interview the bad guys. You ask, how could you of the president of Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, accused of unleashing the genocide in Darfur? You ask essentially the same question at the mountain hideout of the rebel leader Laurent Nkunda, accused of using child soldiers and unleashing war and widespread rape in Congo. You ask the same question of the Serbs who joined in the ethnic cleansing in Kosovo, of a Pakistani president accused of cooperating with al-Qaeda. And after a time, you begin to see how easily people who even seem sitting across from them, like you and me, how easily they are deluded by the narratives they tell themselves, and how quickly these narratives can blind them to the humanity in their enemies. You realize a truth may be more layered than the idea that there are good guys and bad guys. You hear, for example, the president of Sudan, offended by your "how could you" question, say with deep conviction that he had to stop a rebel movement that threatened his country, and he was absolutely not guilty of genocide, before then uttering a disparaging remark that makes it pretty clear he doesn't view the black tribesmen as human as he is, the people he is killing. You hear a Serb talk about how many times his country has been invaded throughout history, and then vow that if he was called again, he would again grab his guns and raid homes again to get rid of the people that he said do not belong here. And so on and so on. You hear this anger separating us from them in many places, and increasingly here at home. And you watch it spread, seemingly like a virus, often with devastating consequences. Eventually, this pattern of narratives and delusions is consistent enough to make you wonder, is there some capacity for inhumanity that is deeply rooted in all of us? Is this darkness a part of what it means to be human? If you're curious, and I obviously am, and you study the science on this question, you will not find it comforting. Researchers now tell us that we have evolved to lie, that we alter our memories, which may help us recover from trauma, but which also cause us to remember what actually never happened, and that we are continually adapting our personality so that over time, even core parts of ourselves can change. The controversial Stanford prison experiment showed us that college students, suddenly given the role of prison guards, could, within days, become psychologically abusive to students designated as prisoners. Why? Simply, the researchers said, because of the situation the students were put in. The famous Milgram experiment by Yale researchers concluded that people could be willing to hurt others with electrical shocks, even when it was against their personal beliefs, just because an authority figure told them to do so. And in what I think is one of the most riveting findings, a growing number of scientists has now concluded that about 100,000 years ago, there were no less than 6 species of human beings who existed at the same time on this planet, including Homo sapiens. And these scientists are asking why Homo sapiens are the only humans to survive, when we actually didn't have the biggest brains or even the biggest and strongest bodies. And adding to the mystery, wherever Homo sapiens spread, first from Africa and then to east and up to Asia, and then over eventually to Europe, the native populations of these other human species immediately became extinct. In his book *Sapiens*, the author Yuval Harari, a noted historian, argues one theory that competition for resources flared up into violence and genocide makes sense. As he points out, tolerance is not a sapien trademark. But if intolerance is somehow a part of being human, then how do we explain the Oskar Schindlers, the Raoul Wallenbergs, the Chiune Sugihara's, and the Irene Sendlers who saved Jews from Hitler? There were not enough, but there were so many people who have risked their lives to protect people. Jean Damon, a young Catholic woman who previously had not known any Jews, is reported to have risked her life repeatedly to smuggle Jewish children out of Brussels. For every name we can Google, Moses, Jesus, Harriet Tubman, Mahatma Gandhi, Witold Pilecki, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and the newly sainted Mother Teresa, who believed every single man, woman, and child is a child of God. There are countless unknowns who have stood up for others throughout our human history. This, too, you can witness as a journalist. A woman in Darfur, upon seeing a fearsome Janjaweed militia, told her younger sister to run in one direction while she ran in another, raising her hands to draw them to her, even though she was pregnant and knew she could not escape. In the Nuba Mountains in Sudan, you witness the moral strength of an elderly woman taking in some 30 orphans to live with her in the caves, to shelter them from her own government's aerial bombing raids, even though she barely has enough money to feed herself, barely has enough food to feed herself. You see humanitarian workers in war zones, volunteers who rescue people from natural disasters, who smuggle food and blankets to this day to Aleppo, who start food pantries for the hungry. And then this, too, seems to be a pattern. Humans seeing other humans under threat move in to shield them against suffering, sometimes even at risk to themselves. It makes you then ask, is this compassion a characteristic only of good people, or is this, too, an intrinsic part of what it means to be human? The cynics among us might be surprised to hear that science says this spark of goodness is deep within the human gene pool. Darwin called our ability to sympathize with others our strongest human instinct, even stronger than self-interest. How is that possible? Science explains that it is this instinct that allows us to make sure that our babies, who were born long before they can fend for themselves, can even survive. Study after study backs this up. One published in the journal Science found that people who spent money on others seemed to be happier than people who spent money on themselves. Another, looking at brain scans, found that the regions involved with positive emotions light up when we help others. We are happier, we breathe deeper, we're more connected to other human beings, our health improves, as does the speed of our recovery from illness. We might even live longer. The Dalai Lama, now 81 years old, will tell you that having compassion for others is, as he puts it, very practical. A University of Michigan study backs this up, finding that people who volunteer tend to live a lot longer than people who don't. It gets even crazier. There is a study that says kindness is a trait that makes you more attractive as a potential mate. Well, now you know why everybody here looks so good today. Studies also tell us compassion is contagious, that when we see it in others, we are inspired ourselves, and that when we practice it, we can strengthen it, which may help explain its variances from person to person. As one researcher from the University of Wisconsin put it, it's kind of like weight training. We found that people can actually build up their compassionate muscle. Well, if that's true, then we can grow it in our children. I often think that it was watching my immigrant mother struggle to feel accepted in America, and my father's efforts to defend her from loneliness and to help her become an American citizen, that helped my young teenage brain to think outside my own needs and grow my compassion. I can still remember in very good detail how deeply happy my mother looked, raising the American flag in front of our little house in Ashland, Oregon, on the day that she found out that she had passed the citizenship test. She felt finally that she belonged. If we step back for a long view of human history, we can actually see humanity's turn toward compassion. Once, atrocities were a fact of war. Now, they're war crimes. Once, orphan children were allowed to sleep outside on the streets of Lower Manhattan, and poor children were made to work in our nation's factories rather than be allowed to go to school. Now we call that child abuse. Once, if people knew that you were gay, you were shunned, you could even be killed in this country. Now you have the same right to thrive in this country as anyone else. And once, people actually posed for photographs in front of people who were lynched African Americans. Photographs to put on postcards to send people they knew. Now, this country has not only elected, it has re-elected its first African American president. And on it goes, not easily, not everywhere, not all at once, but in a slow, persistent way. 2 steps up, 1 step back in humanity's long, steep climb towards greater compassion. Okay, this is going to be a nerdy moment, but recently I decided to study Homer's poem, the long poem called the Iliad, which many of you have read. I know that makes me sound like a bit of a geek, but I think it's kind of cool to read something that's 2,800 years old. And the Iliad tells us about mortal enemies in an epic battle. Achilles, seething with anger, he decides to disfigure Hector, the son of Troy, making him barely recognizable as a human being. And yet this violent, ancient story, popular enough to survive as a poem, recited for centuries before it could be finally written down so that we could all read it, is still woven with compassion so deep for both sides that upon hearing it, perhaps even a Spartan would have felt empathy for a Trojan and vice versa. Fast forward to today in our own time, when we have become so interconnected and globalized and economically interdependent, suddenly, never before has what happens over there mattered over here. And the other way around. And as our world has expanded, so has how we see ourselves. If, as one scientist has said, that we once reserved our compassion only for our own families and our own communities, essentially people who look like us, this has become less true. Terrible human tragedies like a tsunami in Southeast Asia or an earthquake in Haiti have suddenly moved people all over the world to help. But just as we began to focus on our vast similarities rather than our meager differences on an international scale, suddenly again humankind is edging back. Fear is once again driving away compassion for others. History tells us this is temporary, that humans have eventually climbed back towards compassion over and over and over again. 2 steps up, 1 step down. 2 steps up, 1 step down. As we have gone before, it seems likely that we will go again. But how long is it going to take? How long before we finally understand that we are all each other's sisters and brothers, mothers and fathers, daughters and sons, and that we are all related to each other, connected to the same genetic Adam and Eve, every one of us from one original family that emerged from Eastern Africa? How long before this persistent spark of goodness shines even deeper into the dark? Before more of us are willing to stand up and defend our human family? I don't know. The answers are within us all. I hope your compassion in all of your days to come lets you breathe deeper, be happier, live longer. I hope we all live long enough to see the next step up in humanity's rise. But even if I don't, I know it's going to happen. I hope. Don't you? Thank you.